Thank you for joining us today for this webinar on your cloud curriculum before you head to EDUCAUSE in Philadelphia. My name is Fariha Sattar with the cloud team at DLT Solutions. The purpose of today is to give you everything you need to know about cloud before you attend the conference on November 1st and 2nd. This will better prepare you to ask the right questions and make informed decisions on cloud adoption for your institution. Make sure to stop by booth 619 to learn more and speak to our cloud experts. I'd like to welcome Mike Kuntz, Senior Solutions Architect with AWS. Mike has extensive experience with working with customers in the education space. Also joining us is Mark Larson, Cloud Systems Engineer with DLT. He also works with education customers across the nation. With that, I'd like to hand over the reins to Mike to start his presentation.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Looking forward to seeing everyone at EDUCAUSE here in a couple weeks. As mentioned before, DLT will have a pretty large presence there as we. Please feel free to stop by us. We'll actually have presence at the DLT booth as well. So starting off with Amazon Web Services, I want to talk about, for those of you new, what is the cloud? It's the on-demand delivery of IT resources over public or private networks with zero upfront cost. There's no commitments, and it works off of a utility model of pay-as-you-go pricing. AWS has been doing cloud since 2006, and we've amassed over 7,000 education customers worldwide in that time. Some of the customers that you'll be familiar with on the slide here locally, or within the US. And it's not just education customers. We also have what we call our ed tech customers. These are usually SaaS providers such as Instructure and others that work on top of the AWS platform. So even if you're not using AWS today in your university or school, you may be using a service that's hosted on AWS. We're going to take a look at some of the common use cases for higher education. Pick some of the top 10 list things that EDUCAUSE promoted on that are facing educators and schools coming up for the next year and will be highlighted in EDUCAUSE. Security was a big one, which we'll talk about, but for these individual work cases, I want to start off with dev and test. It's a really common workload that we see customers moving to AWS. Getting started off, you want to go and move your development and test workloads up to AWS. Since it's a pay-as-you-go model, when you're not using those resources, you can turn them off and you don't have to pay for them. Similar idea for disaster recovery. So instead of going and hosting another facility across campus or with a partner school and paying millions of dollars for infrastructure, servers, racks that sit there idle as an insurance policy, moving to disaster recovery with an AWS, and AWS is your disaster recovery site, really drives down the cost. If you look at the way that pricing goes, if you're not using those resources, you're not paying for them. Another common use case that we're seeing within AWS is just the explosion of data and storage that's required. Some of our services that we'll talk about essentially infinitely scalable that will grow up. So you don't have to worry about provisioning capacity on these resources. You can just grow and consume them as you need. Big data is a great use case for this. We see universities, large data sets for student information, data warehouses, genomics processing. The amount of data that's coming out of some of this research and analysis is just growing exponentially year over year. And then finally, enterprise applications. The bread and butter of what a lot of schools and central ITs work with. Traditional ERP, sysinformation, Kuali financials, we have use cases of customers using PeopleSoft, other back office enterprise applications, moving those and migrating them wholesale to AWS. Some of the ways that AWS helps transform education. The first one is time to results, access to infrastructure in minutes. When you look at how you have to do on-premise infrastructure, you could have weeks to months of lead time to stand up your servers and your infrastructure, weeks to possibly get those received from your vendors. Running on EC2, Elastic Cloud Compute, or virtual machines or virtual servers in the cloud, you can go and spin up Linux and Windows workloads within minutes. Log in and you're ready to go. That low-cost pay-as-you-go pricing model, for an example, an M4 large server, it's a name and classification that we give to the servers, and EC2, 2 CPUs, 8 gigs of RAM, and it's 10 cents per hour. If you run that server for 10 hours, it'll cost $1. If you turn it off for the other 14 hours of the day, you're not paying for it. Similarly, if you leave it on 24/7 through a month and assume there's 750 hours in a month, you're paying $75 for that server. That next piece works into elasticity. You can go and scale these servers up or out. You can scale horizontally or vertically. Vertically scaling up to the largest server, 128 CPUs and close to 4 terabytes of RAM, or scaling out horizontally to do processing in parallel. Recently, we were working with Clemson that did a big HPC job, had over 1.1 million cores running on AWS. The workload that they did processing on over the course of a weekend. They scaled up as many CPUs as they need, like I said, a little over 1.1 million, ran it over the weekend, and then turned everything off. So their bill ended on Sunday in the afternoon when they turned everything off. AWS footprint and globally accessible. I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. Security, another key driver why people are moving to AWS and how it's helping to transform education. And then scalability. I talked about that a little bit with the Clemson example. And we have several other examples across education that you can see later. All of these things help customers focus on your core mission. So you have lower time spent on infrastructure, allows you to concentrate on new learning initiatives, focus on student success, and dedicate more resources to innovation. It also allows you to strengthen your security posture. The question used to be, when AWS started off, is the cloud secure? That's no longer the question. The question is how fast can we get there? Security is actually driving customers to the platform. And we see this time and time again. A quote here from Tom Soderstrom, CTO of NASA JPL, talking about security. And this is a common statement when we talk to CISOs across universities and schools. We're able to achieve this high bar of security several different ways. The first, through our global compliance certifications and accreditation. It's available to customers to go through if you want to look at our SOC reports or several others that we have available. Over 1,800 compliance and controls that you can go through and view under NDA once you sign up for your account. They're also audited and attested by third parties, so it's not just trusting that we are saying that these things are in place, but third parties also saying that they're in place. On AWS, we have over 1 million active users. In that large ecosystem that we have, you benefit from those that large infrastructure and scale, and the security teams that help manage this. Our security teams follow this on 365 days out of the year, working with customers across multiple industry verticals such as finance, government, military, healthcare. All of the benefits you see from any of those verticals apply to everybody. And then finally, the security infrastructure. So when we look at some of the certification accreditations that are available out there for customers, FedRAMP compliance. Another popular one in education right now is around NIST 800-171. For schools that are working with things around DFARS, by the end of the year, if they're not at NIST 800-171 compliant, they risk losing some funding around those workloads. AWS and some partners, we have the ability to do quick starts, quickly spin up an infrastructure that's a landing zone that you can go put your 800-171 workload. Another common workload we see with customers, especially those with academic medical centers, is around HIPAA and BAAs. We'll work with customers to sign BAAs so you can go store, transmit, and process PHI on the AWS platform. Within AWS, you have access to a deep set of cloud security tools. The first one's around networking. A common misconception is that when you go and start using the cloud, all of your servers and services are hanging out on the internet for access. That's far from the case. You can go through, do a virtual private cloud, or a VPC as we call it, lock that down so it doesn't have access in or from the internet, and only have access from your data center. It's a common use case we have a lot of companies doing. Encryption is a really important tool that we offer at free or near free for a lot of our services. For example, on storage, for the volumes for your servers or S3 storage, which we'll talk about a little bit later, you basically go in, click a checkbox, and your data is encrypted at rest. And this is at no additional cost for you, and there's no performance concerns or degradation. The next cloud security tool that we talk about a lot is identity and access management. So the ability to go through and do users groups and policies around access control. You can also go through and use federation to your existing accounts across the campus. So if you use Shibboleth, for example, you can actually use your campus credentials to then go in and log into AWS resources. And finally, compliance. A tool like CloudTrail allows you to go through and audit and access every single action that's done within your AWS account, and you can keep those audit logs for as long as. talk a little bit about Ivy Tech Community College and some of the success that they had by moving to AWS. They had over 1 million pieces of data that needed to be analyzed every day with individual data marts, such as a learning management system, student information systems, and HR, and then millions of rows of data per day. They took all of this and put it into Amazon Redshift. This is a data warehouse tool made by Amazon, AWS. By going through pushing these ETL workloads into Redshift, they were able to go through and take queries that were running on an old guard data warehouse platform and that took hours to run down to minutes. The first thing they were focusing on was student success rate and around faculty assessment. Really interesting side thing that came out of this as they were doing the assessments and they were looking at student success rates. They had actually discovered some instances of fraud around student loans. They took that and built out further on their platform around fraud detection. So it's really interesting to see, not only just being able to go and take and collate all of that data together, but actually do meaningful results out of it. Talked earlier about another key thing that helps educators move forward is the global footprint that AWS has. In the US, we have 4 regions available. All of these regions, when you look at them globally, 16 of them that are available. When we take our security controls, we implement them as standards across the board, so every region. Example, last year we had to go through, add some additional compliance pieces for an SEC regulation. We didn't just add those compliance pieces to US only regions. We uniformly distributed that across the board to every region. So you don't have to worry about in the US if you're picking a finance region or an education region. They're all meet those same high bars of security and compliance. This allows customers to go through and not have to worry about where their work is. When you put your data into one of these regions, that data stays in a region. That's important for education around FERPA, right? So you want to make sure that your data is going into the US regions, it stays there. Unlike some cloud providers that may go and shuffle shard your data across multiple regions outside. One key differentiator here in the AWS regions I do like to call out is GovCloud in the US. I mentioned that all of these regions are essentially the same. GovCloud has an added compliance piece around ITAR compliance. So if you have workloads that need to meet ITAR CGIS compliance, you can go and launch these into GovCloud. Drilling further down into the AWS regions, you can look at availability zones. Conceptually, these are data centers that fall under a region. They are separate, in a lot of cases, multiple facilities make up an availability zone. They're separated by tens of miles, individual tier 1 ISPs, geographic distance spaces between the individual data centers. So when you think about DR, a lot of people will go back and go region 1, Oregon to the US East, for example. Here, within the same region, you can do DR across multiple availability zones. Example use case, Idaho State University, when they went to move their infrastructure up to AWS and DR, have this information available online for the case study. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mark.
Thanks, Mike. So yeah, now that we know a little bit more about AWS, how do we actually get there? So DLP has been a premier partner of AWS for years, servicing higher education institutions across the board. DLP themselves were founded in 1991, headquartered in Herndon, with over 250 employees. Because of the fact that we have such a heavy focus around higher education and public sector in general, we actually have a lot of experience working with these AWS workloads around the compliance and security requirements that you might have to get into, like with what Mike talked about. So that's going to be one of the big ones. We also actually offer a 24/7 DLT service center as well, which is US citizen, US soil. So for any of those ITAR workloads that you might be working with, we are actually authorized to provide support from AWS, as well as a few other service offerings that you can add on top of that. Even if you're just going to be using AWS lightly, maybe for development workloads or even full enterprise architecture, another advantage to partnering with DLP is the fact that we have multiple contract vehicles for you to use, including a very beneficial Internet to Net Plus agreement for AWS that I can get into a little bit later. So, like Mike said, AWS is extremely flexible. We have the on-demand capabilities and really flexible workloads that we can get into the cloud. But what are the challenges with actually moving those workloads into the cloud? The fact that AWS is so flexible means that all the options can actually be a little daunting for someone that's not familiar with them. With all the different service offerings, you might not know where to start. So a lot of those common use cases fall within these multiple approaches here. Mike touched on a few of them, from the disaster recovery that he talked about to actually setting up the hybrid workloads. If we're going to be moving those enterprise applications in there, we can certainly do that as well. But the great thing about this is there are so many approaches to moving workloads into AWS. You can do anything from setting up storage in there for your archives, just lifting and shifting applications to start with, or if you actually want to get into the modernizing of your applications before you move them, you want to set up big data for your research and analytics, you can certainly do so. So as we're starting out, I wanted to get in a couple of the migration examples that we have. And really, one of the things that I recommend for someone that's moving their first workload is to actually go ahead and pick some low-hanging fruit. So like Mike said, if we have a few of those development test workloads that we're not running all the time, those are perfect first moves for AWS. You can go ahead and stand up simple resources like EC2 for those virtual machines. If you wanted to set up storage in S3, you can certainly do that. It's publicly available if you need it to be, so it's very easy to use and easy to share. But as you start to move those workloads into the cloud, you may even move past the test and development into some of the applications that you might have into the disaster recovery. But in any case, plan to start off with a hybrid architecture. There's going to be some form of on-premise applications as well as the applications in the cloud, whether they need to talk to each other or you're going to completely separate them out. You can start planning that from the get-go. As you start to get a little more comfortable, you can start thinking about modernizing what you can. So start using additional resources that AWS offers to make your life a little bit easier, such as for databases, you can start using the AWS service called RDS. So if you want to not have to manage the operating system and all the underlying pieces of it, you can kind of use a service like RDS as a database as a service, platform as a service, and all those sorts of things are available on AWS as you start to go that direction. So as we're starting out, I wanted to get in a couple of the migration examples that we have. And really, one of the things that I recommend for someone that's moving their first workload is to actually go ahead and pick some low-hanging fruit. So like Mike said, if we have a few of those development test workloads that we're not running all the time, those are perfect first moves for AWS. You can go ahead and stand up simple resources like EC2 for those virtual machines. If you wanted to set up storage in S3, you can certainly do that. It's publicly available if you need it to be, so it's very easy to use and easy to share. But as you start to move those workloads into the cloud, you may even move past the test and development into some of the applications that you might have into the disaster recovery. But in any case, plan to start off with a hybrid architecture. There's going to be some form of on-premise applications as well as the applications in the cloud, whether they need to talk to each other or you're going to completely separate them out. You can start planning that from the get-go. As you start to get a little more comfortable, you can start thinking about modernizing what you can. So start using additional resources that AWS offers to make your life a little bit easier, such as for databases, you can start using the AWS service called RDS. So if you want to not have to manage the operating system and all the underlying pieces of it, you can kind of use a service like RDS as a database as a service, platform as a service, and all those sorts of things are available on AWS as you start to go that direction. Another big example that we find here in the higher education community is working with research projects and even more specifically researcher credits. Like Mike said, AWS is great for these types of workloads. We can analyze data sets from a single weekend to running workloads across the year because of the fact it's so elastic. We can really get things done in an efficient way. And we can work with whatever the researchers might be doing in their projects, whether they want to start using deep learning, if they're working with high performance computing clusters, or even some of the newer Elastic MapReduce and Hadoop frameworks. AWS supports it all. And the great thing about this is it's also globally accessible, like I mentioned. So if we need to share that across different institutions, if it needs to be made accessible across the board, it's very easy to do so through AWS. We work with a few different programs for these researcher credits. So if you have any researchers that are using the institution's funding, that's great, but there are quite a few of these credits available. One of the recent programs that we've worked with extensively is the NIH Commons Credit Program, where NIH actually hands out different levels of credits for these research workloads to be used with the cloud, such as AWS. And another one is the actual AWS Research Cloud Program, which Mike can talk about a little bit.
Thanks. This is a program that we have make available to researchers. It's a simple one-page form. You go on the AWS website and fill out. And what we're looking for here is, greater scientific good, interesting research programs running within the AWS platform. It'll take you about 10 minutes to go through, fill out the form, give us a cost estimate of what you think, and then we issue AWS credits back. These are reviewed quarterly, and we usually we turn this around pretty quickly for customers after the quarter.
All right. Thanks, Mike. So really this partnership between DLT, AWS, and Internet2 is really here to help you. We can help. We have extensive experience working with thousands of higher education accounts. All these different types of workloads that we mentioned, we've seen it all. And as I mentioned, one of the advantages to using DLT is the fact that we have the ITAR compliant service center and resources that can actually help you both professional and managed. So whether you're thinking about just getting training about how to start using AWS, you want some help moving a few of those first few workloads, you might be actually thinking about really architecting a new application or a hybrid application that matches all those compliance requirements. We have a lot of experience around that, and we can help you do that with our professional services team. But once you actually start getting those workloads up into the cloud, you may not always have all of your resources available and even trained from the get-go to be able to manage that consistently. So we have managed services as well that we can offer to help ease that workload. We can actually monitor, we can manage different services for you, help with backups, disaster recovery, and even set up fully managed security offerings as well. So really peace of mind once you actually get those workloads up in there. And whether or not you're going to be using those, again, we have the contract with Internet2 Net Plus. And one of the great things about that is if you are a member of Internet2, there's already a pre-negotiated community contract for you to use that you can procure AWS through. That's going to offer all sorts of discounts for you that scale up as more people are using it. There's also additional benefits to that as well. So we have data egress waivers. Any data that might be coming into AWS or going out of it, we won't charge you for as well under the contract, which is great. There's also options to, maybe some of the development workloads that you have. The researchers that might be working with a couple of accounts may not need full support like other workloads might. So we also give the option to waive that support option. But there's all sorts of other benefits as well. You can check out the link that I provided here for a full set of details. But with that, we appreciate you for joining us, and I'll pass it back over to Fariha.
Thank you, Mike and Mark, for that great presentation. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Please don't forget to stop by booth 619 at EDUCAUSE on November 1st and 2nd. If you have any questions, feel free to email us at cloud@dlt.com, or for more information, visit us at www.dlt.com/cloud.